He read her private letters aloud on the church steps, mocking her, laughing as the town watched. Then, from the crowd, a voice rang out. "That's enough!" A man stepped forward, dropped to one knee, and everything changed. But what happened next will leave you speechless. First, let's go back to where it all began. The wind swept across the prairie in dry, mocking bursts, lifting the hem of Clara Whitmore's faded dress and stinging her eyes with grit. But the sting in her chest, sharp, raw, and relentless, was far worse than anything the wind could offer. It was the look on Henry Blackwell's face that did it. That flicker of disgust, of betrayal, like he'd been cheated out of a prize he believed he was owed. The same man who had once written that he longed to build a future with a kind-hearted woman now stared at her with the flat-eyed contempt reserved for cattle gone lame. "You lied to me." The words hit with more force than a slap. Clara's hands instinctively cradled her belly, though the baby was too young to understand the violence in the air. Her lips parted, desperate to explain, but Henry wasn't interested in reasons. He wanted a target, and she had given him one. "I tried to tell you," she whispered, voice cracking. But he cut her down with a sharp gesture, like he was swatting at a fly. "You're already pregnant. I wanted a wife, not someone else's mistake." Clara flinched as if the words had weight, and they did. Not just in meaning, but in the way they turned the crowd behind him. A handful of townsfolk had come to witness the arrival of the new bride, some out of curiosity, others out of spiteful boredom. Now their faces hardened, lips pursed, eyes narrow with judgment. A few whispered. One man laughed. A woman stepped behind her husband as though Clara might infect her simply by standing there. Henry's voice rose for everyone to hear. "This one's damaged goods. Someone pick her up before she shames the town." The silence that followed was thunderous. Clara stood frozen, not because she didn't want to run, but because there was nowhere to go, no home to return to, no arms to fall into. The town of Fairhaven had become a trial she never consented to face. No jury, just executioners. Her cheeks burned, not from shame but from something deeper, an old flame that flickered beneath years of suppression. Rage. Not the kind that lashes out, but the quiet kind that digs in and stays, that stores itself like kindling. Her eyes welled, but she blinked the tears away. She would not give them the satisfaction. Not him. Not them. She had come looking for a new life. What she found instead was a crucible. And Clara Whitmore would walk through fire before letting them see her fall. The mattress sagged like wet bread beneath her bones, springs groaning with every shift. Clara lay in the stale, yellow-lit room of Miss Greeley's motel, her breath held just long enough to pretend she wasn't there. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, curling like the tongues of judgment that hounded her by day. Every corner of the room smelled of old liquor and hopeless men. The kind who stumbled into the saloon next door to forget. Clara didn't have that luxury. There was nothing to forget, only more to remember. Miss Greeley hadn't smiled when she handed over the key, just squinted past her wire-rimmed glasses and muttered, "I don't approve. But God says we help the fallen." Then she turned and left, letting the door creak shut behind her like the closing of a coffin. The bed was too cold at night, too hot by morning. The sheets were stiff with starch but stained all the same. Clara didn't ask questions. She folded her hands over the swell of her belly and whispered to the life inside her. "I'm still here," she murmured. "We're still here." But being there meant enduring. Whispers clung to her like horseflies. "She's a tramp. Probably tried to trap Henry. Should have stayed where she came from." Words slithered through doorways, passed between women in church and men at the smithy. Her reputation had rotted before she'd taken her first bite of Fairhaven bread. She worked where she could, cleaning stables, scrubbing tools, offering to sew buttons and mend socks for pennies. But the stables were cleaner than the motel. Even the horses seemed to respect her more than the people. And though mucking stalls left her back aching and her clothes reeking of manure, it was quiet. Horses didn't judge, they listened. It was on one of those mornings, knee-deep in hay and silence, that she heard the sound of footsteps slow behind her. Not rushed, not hesitant, just present. A pair of work boots stopped at the stall gate. "You okay, miss?" The voice was low and rough like a violin bow dragged against rusted strings, but something in it made her look up. The sun cut behind the man's shoulder, casting half his face in shadow, but his eyes, steel blue and unexpectedly soft, studied her without fear or pity. Clara blinked. "I'm fine," she lied, voice paper-thin. "You don't look fine," he said, stepping closer, then settling onto a hay bale like he'd been planning it all morning. "Tell me everything." She looked at him, at the soot on his hands, the gentle calm of his gaze, and for the first time since stepping off that train, she didn't feel dirty. She felt seen. The days unfolded like battered pages of a book no one expected Clara to finish reading. But Jacob read them with her, one by one, patiently, without skipping the hard chapters. He came without asking and stayed without demanding. When she coughed through fever, he brought broth, thick, seasoned, homemade. He didn't flinch when she vomited in front of him. Just held her hair back with the same calm strength he used to shoe horses or bend iron. When the roof in her motel room started leaking, he patched it with spare shingles from his shop. "No use drowning when life's already trying to bury you," he said, handing her a hammer. Together they worked in silence, and she felt, for the first time in weeks, useful again. One evening, after setting down a small carved rattle, a delicate thing shaped like a bear, he looked at her and said, "People don't care what's true. They care what fits their story. But I see you, Clara, not their story." Clara had no words for that, only the stinging rush behind her eyes. No man had ever said something like that to her, not without trying to own her afterward. Jacob didn't want to fix her. He simply believed in her as she was. That alone felt like salvation. When he spoke about his past, it wasn't to draw sympathy. It was to build a bridge. "I was an orphan. First house I got placed in, the man used his belt like punctuation. I stopped speaking altogether for 2 years. Got tossed around until I learned how to work. Iron doesn't lie, you know. You hit it, it changes. Just like people. But only if the fire's hot enough." Clara didn't interrupt, didn't pity, just listened. And in the quiet that followed, something unspoken passed between them, an understanding forged not from romance but recognition. Two people scarred in different ways, still choosing to be. The town noticed. Whispers again. But they were different now, curious. Some sharp, some half-envious. The widow at the post office mentioned how the blacksmith's been real friendly with that Whitmore girl. The butcher offered Clara a pork shoulder at half price. For the baby. Even the preacher nodded politely, though he didn't meet her eyes. Then came the Sunday morning. Clara strolled into town, her belly full, her shoulders no longer hunched beneath shame. A light breeze caught her hair. For a moment she felt normal, until she heard the laughter. She turned toward the church, and there he was, Henry, standing on the steps, waving papers in the air. Her letters, the ones she'd written in desperation and mailed with trembling fingers. Her rawness now turned into spectacle. "Listen to this," Henry shouted. "Dear Henry, I know I should have told you sooner." Her knees weakened, breath caught. People circled like buzzards. Then Jacob's voice thundered across the square. "That's enough!" Gasps. Silence. Henry sneered. "You gonna marry her then? Raise her bastard?" Jacob turned to Clara, and without hesitation, dropped to one knee on the church steps. "Yes," he said, loud and clear, "if she'll have me." And in that single moment, under the eyes of the town and the gaze of the God they all claimed to follow, Clara saw something more than love. She saw belief. Clara couldn't speak. Her throat closed, her eyes flooded. This wasn't just love. It was redemption. She knelt too, right there in the dirt beside Jacob, and whispered, "Yes." Someone in the crowd muttered, "This town's gone mad." But others, they started clapping, one by one, until the sound of it swallowed the silence. In the months that followed, everything changed. Henry left town, bitter and broke after losing investors who no longer trusted a man who'd publicly humiliated a woman for sport. Jacob and Clara married in a small but joy-filled ceremony. No fanfare, no speeches, just two people who had been broken and had found in each other the strength to become whole. The baby, named Hope, was born under a pink sunrise, and Clara, she became a midwife. The same women who had turned their backs now came to her for help. She welcomed them with open arms. Because once you've been rejected and still found love, you don't shut your heart to others. You lead the way.